Spent 31 years as a family court judge in the state of Georgia, and in that time I saw things that would make most people lose sleep for a decade. I didn't lose sleep. I learned early that emotion and judgment cannot occupy the same seat at the same time. You feel it, yes, but you don't let it drive. That discipline, that particular kind of stillness, is the only reason my daughter is alive today. Her name is Vivian, my youngest. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, which is either a gift or a curse depending on the day. When she was little, she used to climb into my lap while I read case files and ask me what the papers said. I'd tell her, "They say people are complicated, baby." She'd nod like that made perfect sense, then go back to her colouring book. She trusted me to tell her the truth. I need to remember that, because there was a season, a long dark one, where I failed to tell her the truth when it mattered most. She met her husband at a charity fundraiser downtown. He worked in commercial real estate, well-dressed, soft-spoken in the way that some men are soft-spoken when they want something. He had this habit of listening very carefully when you talked, tilting his head just slightly. Like everything you said was fascinating. Women love that. I loved it too at first. I told my husband Walter that our daughter had found herself a good one. Walter wasn't so sure. He said something quiet and forgettable at the time that I keep turning over in my mind now. He said, "He listens too hard, Cecile. Men who listen that hard are usually taking notes." Walter passed 3 years before any of this happened. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to gone. I didn't have him to talk to when things started going wrong. That silence left a hole in my thinking that I didn't fully recognize until much later. The engagement was quick. 14 months after they met, Vivian called me from the parking lot of a restaurant, voice bright as a new penny, to tell me he had proposed. I heard joy in her voice, real joy, the kind that doesn't perform. I told her congratulations, and I meant it. I did. I just also sat on my back porch afterward for a long time and watched the kudzu grow over the fence and felt something I couldn't name. I named it later. It was warning. The wedding was beautiful, in the way that expensive things are beautiful. Everything coordinated, nothing out of place. 180 guests at a venue outside Savannah, with string lights and a live band. His mother, a woman I'll call Roberta, sat at the head table in a cream dress that was one shade too close to white for a mother of the groom. She made a toast that was supposed to be about Vivian, but was actually about her son. How he'd worked so hard, how he deserved the best, how she knew he'd found it. Vivian laughed and squeezed his hand. I watched Roberta watch Vivian and thought, that woman is not giving anything up tonight. She's just transferring ownership. I told myself I was being cynical. Decades of family court will do that to you. I'd seen so many bad families that I'd started seeing rot where there wasn't any. I talked myself out of what I felt. That was my first mistake. The first year was fine, or at least Vivian told me it was fine, which is not the same thing. They bought a house in a suburb 40 minutes from me, not so far that I'd worry, just far enough that dropping by unannounced wasn't natural. He worked long hours. She had left her job at the nonprofit to, as she put it, focus on building the home. That phrase sat wrong with me. Vivian had a master's degree in public health. She'd spent 4 years developing wellness programs for underserved communities. She didn't use words like building the home. Those were someone else's words in her mouth. I mentioned it once, gently. She said she was happy, and her voice had that particular quality of someone reciting a true thing they've had to convince themselves of. I let it go. Another mistake. What I noticed and catalogued without meaning to, because that's what 31 years of observation does to your brain. She stopped wearing her hair. Natural. He preferred it straightened, she mentioned once, casually, the way you mention a preference for a brand of coffee. She stopped calling her college friends as often. One of them, a woman she'd been close to since freshman year at Spelman, told me at Thanksgiving that Vivian seemed different, quieter, like she was editing herself. I stored that phrase. I didn't act on it. She stopped disagreeing with him in front of people. I noticed this at Christmas dinner, her second year of marriage. He made a comment about the economy, something half-informed, the kind of thing that invites pushback, and Vivian, who had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about them, just nodded. I looked at her. She was looking at her plate. "What do you think, Vivian?" I asked. She looked up and smiled. "I think he's probably right." She didn't think he was probably right. I could see it. There was a whole conversation happening behind her eyes that never reached her mouth. Roberta was there that Christmas. She had a way of directing things, Roberta did, without appearing to direct them. She'd suggest and defer in the same breath. "Oh, I think it would be lovely if we all went to the early service, but of course, whatever you all want." The result was always what she wanted. She rearranged my daughter's kitchen once, just to make it more functional, while Vivian was in the other room. Vivian came back, saw it, said nothing. I watched her swallow something and tell Roberta it looked great. 3 years in, I started noticing physical things. Not marks, nothing that obvious, but Vivian had lost weight. She didn't need to lose. She had a stillness about her that wasn't peace. It was the stillness of someone who has learned to take up less space. She flinched once when he raised his hand to flag down the waiter. It was half a second. He didn't notice. I noticed. I'd spent a career reading bodies in a courtroom. A flinch like that doesn't come from nowhere. I called her that night and asked her directly, "Is everything okay at home?" She said yes immediately. Too immediately, the way people answer questions they've rehearsed for. "Vivian, you can tell me anything." "Mum, I'm fine. You worry too much." She got off the phone quickly. I sat with the phone in my hand in my kitchen for a long time. I did not act. I thought I needed more. I thought I needed something concrete, something I could point to. I was applying courtroom standards to my own daughter's life, and that was, I'll say it plainly, a failure of love. When you love someone, you don't wait for evidence. You move on instinct. I had the instinct for 3 years, and I kept overruling it. The dinner happened in April, his mother's birthday. She had chosen the restaurant herself, a private room at a steakhouse in Buckhead, the kind of place with dark wood panelling and a sommelier who speaks in a murmur. There were about 12 of us. His aunts, 2 of his colleagues and their wives, Roberta at the head of the table in another near-white outfit, him at her right hand, Vivian beside him. The evening started fine. The wine was poured. The bread came. Roberta was holding court telling a story about a trip she'd taken to Portugal, and everyone was listening the way people listen when the person talking controls the mood of the room. Vivian had made a dish to contribute. She'd spent 2 days on it, a sweet potato casserole from my mother's recipe, the one that had been at every family gathering of mine since I was a child. She'd asked me for it specifically. I remember thinking that was lovely, that she was bringing something of herself to his family's table. He tasted it, then he put his fork down. It was the way he put the fork down, deliberate, like punctuation. He said, "This is too sweet." That was all. But the way he said it, not to her, almost to the table, it landed like a verdict. Vivian said, softly, I followed the recipe. "It's too sweet," he said again. "I've told you before about heavy-handed cooking." The table got quiet in the way tables get quiet when something is happening that no one wants to name. Roberta said, "She's still learning." The sound of those words, still learning. Like Vivian was a child, like her years, her degrees, her life before him counted for nothing once she'd walked into this family. Vivian picked up her fork again. She was trying to disappear inside herself. I could see it, pulling inward the way I'd watched her do all evening, all year, for years. And then he reached over. He didn't ball his fist. It was an open hand, a slap, sharp, fast, almost casual, across her forearm. the kind of hit designed to sting and humiliate more than harm, like you'd discipline a child who'd reached for something they weren't supposed to touch. Vivian went completely still. And Roberta looked at her son and then at Vivian, and she said quietly, with a kind of satisfaction that made my blood go cold in a way I have not experienced since the worst days of my career. She said, "That's what happens when you don't listen." She smiled. "I want you to understand something about me in that moment. I am not a woman who cries in public. I am not a woman who shouts. I spent 31 years controlling my face in a courtroom so that nothing I showed could be used against the integrity of a decision. I know what I look like when I'm still." I was very still. I put my napkin on the table. I picked up my purse. I looked at my daughter, who was staring at her plate, and I said her name just once, quietly, the way I used to say it when she was small and I needed her to look at me. She looked up. "Come with me to the restroom," I said. He started to say something. I looked at him. I don't know exactly what he saw on my face, I couldn't tell you, but he stopped. In the hallway outside the restroom, I held both of Vivian's hands, and I looked at her and I said, "How long?" She started to say, "Mom, it's not." "How long, Vivian?" She looked at the wall. She swallowed. "The second year," she said. "Mostly it's just—" "I don't need the qualifications," I said. "I just needed to know." I hugged her. I held her for a moment. Then I said, "Go back in and sit down, act normal. Order dessert. Don't let him know we talked." She looked scared. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make a phone call." I went to the far end of the hallway, past the coat check, near the back exit where it was quiet. I called a woman I had mentored for 15 years, who was now a sitting judge in Fulton County. I told her what I had witnessed. I told her what my daughter had told me. I asked her one question: what do I need and how fast can we move? Then I called my daughter's oldest friend, the one from Spillman, the one who said Vivian was editing herself. I told her I needed her to be available to take Vivian in starting tomorrow, no questions asked, and I would explain everything. She said without a single second of hesitation, "She can come tonight if she needs to." Then I called my attorney. It was a Saturday evening. He picked up on the third ring. He knew my voice and he knew that I did not call on Saturday evenings without reason. I told him I needed emergency protective order documentation ready by Monday morning. He said he'd have a colleague available Sunday afternoon to take Vivian's statement. I was on the phone for 11 minutes. I went back to that private dining room and I sat down and I ordered the flourless chocolate cake because I knew Vivian liked it and I wanted her to have something sweet at that table on that night, even if it was a small thing. Roberta was telling another story. He had refilled his wine. Vivian was sitting with her hands in her lap. She looked at me when I came in, just her eyes, a question. I gave her the smallest nod. She exhaled. Something shifted in her shoulders, barely perceptible, the easing of a weight she'd been holding so long she'd forgotten it was there. We ate dessert. We said our goodbyes. In the parking lot, when he was pulling the car around, I walked close to Vivian and said, "Tomorrow morning. Say you're coming to help me with something at the house. Bring anything that matters to you in a bag. Don't tell him where you're going." "He'll be angry," she whispered. "Yes," I said, "he will." She came the next morning with one bag and a second bag she packed the night before and hidden in her car, which told me something important. Told me that some part of her had been preparing for this moment before I arrived at it. The body knows, even when the mind keeps making excuses. She had been ready. She just needed someone to come get her. What followed was not easy, and I won't pretend it was. There was the protective order, which my colleague expedited with the testimony of 3 people who had been at that dinner, including one of his own colleagues' wives, who, it turned out, had been waiting for someone to ask. There was the divorce, which she contested and prolonged because men like that cannot stand the withdrawal of control, and contested divorces are just another form of the same thing. There was the deposition in which Roberta claimed she had no memory of what she said. She said it clearly and without flinching, and I thought that is a woman who has been saying things and forgetting them her whole life. Vivian moved into the guest room at my house for 4 months, and then into an apartment 2 miles away, and then, slowly, into herself again. There were days she defended him. There were days she was furious with me for interfering. There were days she sat at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning and cried in a way she hadn't cried since her father died. I did not try to fix those days. I just sat with her. I made tea. I kept my mouth shut when keeping it shut was what was needed, and I spoke when she needed to hear something true. I've been asked by people who know pieces of this story whether I blame myself for waiting as long as I did, whether I should have moved sooner, whether 3 years of documented changes, one clear flinch, one phone call that ended too quickly, whether any of that should have been enough. Yes, it should have. I should have trusted my instinct in year 1. I should have asked harder questions sooner. I had the tools. I had the knowledge. And I loved my daughter so much that I was afraid of being wrong, afraid of overstepping, afraid of damaging her marriage with my suspicion, when what I should have been afraid of was what was actually happening inside it. I don't say this to perform guilt. I say it because if there is a mother or a sister or a friend reading this who has that feeling, that quiet, persistent wrongness that you keep talking yourself out of, I want you to know you are not wrong. That feeling is information. Act on it before I acted on mine. The divorce was finalized 11 months after that dinner. He moved out of state. Roberta sent Vivian a card that said she hoped things worked out for her, which was the most she could manage by way of accountability, apparently. Vivian is doing well now. She went back to work 6 months after the divorce, consulting work for a public health organization. Her own hours, her own choices. She started running again. She used to run in college, 5Ks mostly, and she'd given that up somewhere in the middle of that marriage along with so many other parts of herself. Now she texts me her mile times on weekend mornings. I don't run. I'm 63 years old and my knees have opinions about that. But I read every single text and every single time I think, there she is. There is my daughter. She is seeing someone new, carefully, slowly, on her own terms. She told me she paid attention to how he treated the waiter on their first dinner out. She watched to see whether he listened to her the way someone does when they're taking notes, or the way someone does when they're just glad you're talking. She said she's learned the difference. She called me last Sunday from the trail where she runs. She was out of breath and laughing about something, some small thing, a dog that had run through a puddle and shaken itself on her. I stood in my kitchen and listened to her laugh. That laugh. That is the whole of it. That is what I was fighting for. I have retired from the bench now. I sit on my porch in the evenings and watch the light change over the tree line, and sometimes I think about all the families who came through my courtroom over 3 decades, all the damage done behind closed doors, all the things that didn't happen because someone was too afraid to say them out loud. I think about what I know and what I failed to apply when it was my own. There is no courtroom training that substitutes for the moment you look at Chald and understand what has been done to her. There is no objectivity available to you in that hallway when she tells you the second year and you do the math in your head and you understand what that means. All my discipline, all my years, they collapsed into just one thing, her name, just her name. I said it. She looked up. That was enough to start. I keep coming back to that fork, the way he set it down on the table, not dropped, not placed, but set. Deliberate, like a period at the end of a sentence he'd been composing for years. That one gesture told me everything I had spent 3 years talking myself out of knowing. There is a kind of cause and effect that doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly, through small decisions and small silences, through the moments you choose to look away, because looking directly is too costly. Roberta raised a son who believed a woman's disagreement was something to correct with his hands, because somewhere along the way, no one with the authority to stop it ever did. And I, who had that authority in my own home, at my own dinner table, waited too long to use it. Actions have consequences, so do failures to act. I sat with that truth for a long time before I could hold it without flinching. What I know now, that I wish I had known sooner, is that real integrity, the kind that holds when it's uncomfortable, when the cost is high, when the person you love might be angry at you for it, is not something you perform in public. It lives in the private moments. It lives in whether you ask the hard question or let it go, whether you trust what you know or keep overruling yourself to keep the peace. I had spent 3 decades making decisions from a place of principle in a courtroom, and then I came home and let love make me afraid to do the same for my own daughter. That is not something I have fully forgiven myself for. I'm not sure I should. But I also know this. The moment I stopped being afraid and started being useful, things moved. That is not coincidence. That is what happens when you finally bring your whole self, your knowledge, your history, your willingness to act, to bear on something that matters. The protective order was granted. The divorce went through. The colleague's wife who came forward had been waiting for someone to open the door. None of that happened by accident. It happened because one evening in a hallway outside a restroom, I looked at my daughter and chose clarity over comfort. Vivian is the one who did the hardest work. I want to say that plainly. I made calls. She made the decision to leave, to testify, to sit with her grief and her anger and her love for a man who had hurt her, and to keep going anyway. That takes something that cannot be handed to you or ordered on your behalf. It has to come from inside, from some part of you that knows your own worth, even when everything around you has been working to convince you otherwise. She found that part. She protected it long enough to get out. I think about the women who are sitting at their own tables right now, putting their forks down carefully, editing themselves smaller, telling someone who loves them that everything is fine. I think about the mothers and the sisters and the friends who sense something is wrong and keep talking themselves out of it. Trust what you know. Ask the direct question. Make the call. The people who need you are waiting for you to stop being polite about it.